In this video, I'm going to show you the exact method that I use with my students to help them know whether or not their arrangements are boring or interesting every single time. It is literally so doggone simple that by the end of this video, you're going to be like, well, now I gotta try it. And it will literally help you know whether or not you need to add more things or take things away or change things or any number of different ways that you can make your arrangements more interesting. One of the biggest reasons that amateur producers have a really hard time knowing whether or not their arrangements are interesting or not, or maybe they're making an arrangement that just simply doesn't progress quite enough or isn't interesting throughout, there's not enough change happening, is because as producers, we can get so zoomed in, we can get so stuck in the minor details and the minutia that we think we're making moves, we think we're changing things, we think we're doing things, but then we fail to zoom out and look at the big picture. And the more time you spend on something, the harder it is to pull back and look at the whole thing and recognize this is not pushing forward enough and this is simply not interesting enough. So what I'm going to show you here is an incredibly simple method that actually forces you to zoom back and look at the entire thing and be objective. I call this the skip test. And I have used this over and over and over again with my students whenever I give them feedback to help demonstrate to them why something is not working. And when I do this, literally every single time, they're like, oh my gosh, that makes so much more sense now. So I have a session pulled up here. I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. And you're actually going to see what happens when you have an arrangement that is interesting, and we can tell it's interesting because of this. Let's do it. And so the idea here is that what we want to do is start at the very beginning of the song, and then every 15 to 20 seconds, we're just going to skip ahead and we're going to play a little bit, and then we're going to skip ahead and then we're going to play a little bit. And we're asking ourselves a very simple question. Every time I skip, is the song actually progressing? Are new things being introduced? And it doesn't have to be like new sounds necessarily. It could be even just changing what the patterns of the music are. So if you're doing folk music, for example, you're probably not gonna be doing what I'm doing in this track. And I use folk as an example because it's such a polar opposite of what I'm doing. But even with the context of like acoustic music, for example, you're still needing to change things. The arrangement perspective is gonna be more in the patterns that are happening. So if you start with more of a fingerpick guitar, then maybe you go to a strum guitar or more of a block chords in the piano or something like that. The main point here isn't necessarily about sound choice, but it's mainly about in the context of this song, with what the song is trying to accomplish, what you are trying to accomplish as a musician, as a creative, as an artist, are you changing things enough as you progress and skip through the song? We're talking about zooming back, right? We're talking about zooming out, looking at the whole thing. We need to ask ourselves every 15 to 20 seconds, are things changing enough for me to very clearly articulate that yes, things are happening that keep it interesting? Because if the answer is no, which this happens all the time, where I'll skip ahead and it's like the exact same sounds, the exact same patterns, the exact same chords, the exact same everything. Like literally nothing is different. The drums, it's like a loop. I'm telling you, your audience is gonna be bored out of their mind if it sounds like that. So you need to be trying to make things more interesting. So again, I wanna be very clear, I'm not talking about you going to the extremes that I tend to go to, because my music tends to be a little bit more on the extreme side of this. I like contrast a lot, so I use a lot of contrast in my music. But the main point is it pushing it forward? So we're gonna start at the very beginning here. And what I wanna do is actually mute out these vocals. That way we're entirely focused on the instrumental only, okay? We're focused entirely on the instrumental, even though the vocals are certainly a part of this. Okay, so we're just gonna stop there, right? We're like 10 seconds in, we're just gonna stop right there. Okay, so we've introduced something. So we're gonna skip ahead to like 25 seconds. Let's see where we're at. And yes, we already have different sounds happening. We already have something different. We have some more pad elements happening. And then even here, the chord progression changes. The entire thing changes quite a bit here. So again, if we're going back to the beginning, skip ahead 15, we're now at 16 seconds up here. We now have a drum hit, we have a bass hit, we have some sustained stuff happening. Now all of a sudden we're developing an idea. Let's skip ahead another like 15 or so seconds. We're at 35 seconds now. Yes. You see what I'm saying? So if you're skipping ahead along the way, you can very clearly, very easily see, okay, is this actually progressing? Another way of doing this is by simply going from verse 1 to verse 2, just literally skipping from one to the next, right next to each other. Because so often what happens is when we listen to a song from start to finish, we hear verse 1, then we hear a pre-chorus, then we hear a chorus, and then we hear verse 2, right? But by having all this space in the middle with the pre-chorus and the chorus and then verse 2, sometimes we forget what verse 1 was, and as a result, it's very easy to make verse 2 very, very similar to verse 1 And listeners do pick up on this. So let's go straight to verse 2 and see how things sound in verse 2. Immediately, right away, this is a completely different feeling. The pattern on the keyboard is the same, but listen to how the sound is different. This is verse 2. This is verse 1. The piano is lower. It's more of an actual piano sound, whereas in verse 2, it's more of a muted, plucked piano sound. We also have some higher elements happening that kind of add a sense of creepiness, and we no longer have those lower pizzicato strings adding some depth and richness in verse 2, which kind of gives this eerie kind of feeling, right? All right, so let's skip ahead a little bit more. We're continuing that pattern in the keyboards, but now we've added some more rhythmic elements. We have a little bit more sustained elements. We have a 4 on the floor happening in the kick, and we now have a bass hit happening on every single downbeat. So there is an actual development that is happening in the music. But again, when you get so zoomed in, it's so easy in the context of an arrangement where you're not doing this, where you don't have all of these things changing. It's very, very easy to just lose sight of the whole thing, and you don't realize that you're just copy pasting things, or you're looping things, or you're really overusing things too much. This whole idea of skipping around in your song and actually skipping to test out to see if your arrangement is actually interesting throughout is such a great way of zooming out, looking at the big picture, and seeing objectively, are things changing every different section of the song, every time I skip ahead, or am I literally hearing the exact same thing over and over and over again? I hope this helps you.